Hello YouTube and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. Today we're once more talking about the Clockwork City, specifically what happened to the city after Sotha Sil's demise at the hands of Almalexia. This story is told in quite some detail in the Elder Scrolls Legends Clockwork City DLC, and today we're delving right into it. So without any further ado, let's get into it. The Clockwork City is one of those places which set the Elder Scrolls universe apart from most other fantasy universes. The concept of a living god, in this case Sotha Sil of the Tribunal, creating his own miniature mechanical realm to simulate the real world and then live in it with all his followers by shrinking everybody down, is a pretty unique concept. Sotha Sil essentially created a mechanical biosphere the size of maybe half a human, with a whole livable world inside of it, filled with mechanical and synthetic flora and fauna, all created by the living god himself. The entire city was powered by his divine power. Everything created in it was created at his will and in a strive for perfection, a perfection not found on Tamriel, as it's said that the city itself might even partly reside inside a separate realm. This made it possible to create all sorts of mechanical life within the Clockwork City and replicate many of the things Tamriel has, but in perfected form, all powered and thought up by Sotha Sil's divine energy and intellect. But what happens to a city like that, which is completely dependent on the living god and his power, when the living god is not around for a while because he has business somewhere else, or in a bad scenario loses his power or maybe even dies? The city would immediately stop functioning, and this is something that Sotha Sil himself also realized. So that is why in his initial designs of the realm he built a so-called low power mode, in which many systems are either shut down or working on half capacity. This way the city could still be powered whenever Sotha Sil was in his hibernation chambers for extended periods of time, or in the case that his power would one day wane. But what if his power, or he himself, were to disappear completely? What if he were to be cut off fully from the source of his power, which was the heart of Lorkhan? Or what if he would die? Well, initially Sotha Sil never really took his own death into account when designing the city, that is, until the return of Dagoth-Ur. When Dagoth-Ur, the antagonist of the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, returned, he cut the Tribunal off from their divine power that was derived from the heart of Lorkhan by occupying the Heart Chamber and blocking the Tribunal from renewing their godly powers at the heart. The day of Dagoth-Ur's return, Sotha Sil realized that the heart of Lorkhan was too important, not just for the Tribunal and their godly powers, but for everybody that depended on said power, including all of his followers that lived inside the Clockwork City, powered by him. Without his power, the city would fall into disrepair and would become unlivable. So he started looking for an alternative way of powering his own divinity and in extension his city. In his own words, he needed a backup for the heart of Lorkhan. So in secret he started to work on his greatest creation yet. A mechanical heart of Lorkhan, a replica so to speak. In the Clockwork City he had already proven that he was able to recreate a model life and land in his way. But this would be something completely different. This would be an undertaking of far more difficulty. It would be the most daunting task that he'd ever undertake. His replica heart would perhaps be not as powerful as the godly original, or perhaps he would indeed find a way to perfect even the heart of Lorkhan in the process and build a more powerful one, if he put his mind to it. But all that mattered in the end was that the heart would be powerful enough to power his own city and keep him powerful enough to maintain it and his divinity. He worked on his mechanical heart in secret, deep within the Cognitum Centralis, a part of the Clockwork City that only Sotha Sil has access to and where he would often disappear in for many years, not seen by his followers. This chamber, hidden deep within the Cognitum Centralis, he would call the Chamber of Lorkhan, and he would work on the mechanical replica of the heart of Lorkhan for hundreds of years, from the return of Dagoth-Ur all the way up until his very death at the end of the Third Era. Work on the mechanical heart was tedious to say the least. The raw power that he conceived while constructing it was unstable and several times even threatened to destroy him and the entire Clockwork City. But over time he managed to bring the raw power of the mechanical heart under control, and he was able to start working the heart in order to one day complete the systems that would allow him to take the power of the heart and use it for the power of his city and for himself. He'd already worked on the heart for several hundreds of years when the day of his death came. In the Elder Scrolls Legends, it's revealed that Sotha Sil knew of his impending doom, as his fellow tribunal member, Almalexia, in her final madness, came to the Clockwork City to murder Sotha Sil. He already knew that his fate would be death, and he had prepared for it. In his final moments, he fought with Almalexia, knowing that he would lose, but in those final moments, all that he could do was stall for time. The systems that would allow him to make use of the heart's power were not ready at that time, so he had to use whatever power he had left in himself and in his body and in his mind to defend against Almalexia, because he had a reason to try and stall for time. Because when he learned several years before that Almalexia intended to kill him, he had started working on automated systems which would be able to use a very small part of the raw power emanating from the heart in order to keep functioning after his death, and then work on the systems which would allow the heart to eventually power the entire city and all the other machines. He managed to complete the systems which would work on the heart just in time. However, those machines, after powering up, needed more time to seal the chamber with the mechanical heart in it until it would be finished. That seal would make the power emanating from the heart undetectable and would make the chamber inaccessible to everybody until it would be finished, so that Almalexia would not be able to claim the heart for herself and try to use the destructive power for herself. 22 minutes. That was the time left that the systems needed to seal the chamber of the heart until it was finished. 22 minutes, that's how long Sotha Sil needed to stall Almalexia. And he succeeded, as the replacement heart was locked away until it would be finished and ready to power the entire city for the rest of eternity. It would take 207 years for it to be fully finished by the automated systems. 207 years in which the city needed to prevail somehow without their god's power. Sotha Sil died, and Almalexia was killed by the Nerevarine in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, and the Clockwork City was lost to history. Not many knew how to access it, and without Sotha Sil and his knowledge and academia to lure new knowledge seekers there, the city started to decline. Many of its inhabitants likely fled to the outside world. After Sotha Sil's death and the sealing of the mechanical heart, the city was, presumably for a while, completely without power, with literally all its systems being offline. But, likely several months or maybe years, the automated systems working on the mechanical heart managed to complete the first phase of the systems which would allow to control the power of the heart, which then allowed the city to at least start operating again on an extremely low power mode. Vital systems needed to keep what remained of the population alive likely restored first, allowing them to continue to live. But not many had remained in the city. After Sotha Sil's death, many of the inhabitants of the city had left. Only a few apostles, which were Sotha Sil's most dedicated followers, actually remained in the city. They likely had a harsh life. Without the power of the god, food must have been very scarce and survival must have been really hard. But their waiting would eventually be rewarded, as when the basic systems once again powered up, it would probably allow them to start growing synthetic crops again and have some vital machines run again. This group of followers was so small that the little power that they had was enough to just barely survive on for many years. With the city lost to the rest of Tamriel, this group of followers were the only ones to witness the decline of the city. Due to the systems being without power, vegetation from the outside somehow found its way into the city, and over the ages made several buildings in the city crumble and be overgrown with vines. But the city endured, and over the years more and more systems got back online as the automated systems working on the heart further completed their work. The city continued to operate on low power, but at least continued to operate. The remaining Clockwork apostles actually continued to live inside the city and followed the ways of Sotha Sil, completely secluded from the outside world. That is, until the year 201 of the 4th era, supposedly in parallel with Skyrim's main questline. It was at this time when an old apprentice of Sotha Sil, a dark elf named Mercenar, sought entrance into the city. Mercenar was a dark elf with great intellect, and he was even recognized and taught by Sotha Sil himself for a while. But eventually the living god had cast him out of the city centuries prior, because he had undertaken very unethical experiments on his fellow apostles and other inhabitants of the Clockwork City, creating abominations, as Sotha Sil called it. Mercenar at this time sought the artifact which continued to power the city in the 4th era, long after Sotha Sil's death, as he had heard rumors that the city was still functioning and presumed that he could use whatever was powering the city in order to turn himself into a living god, equaling Sotha Sil at the height of his power. In the Elder Scrolls Legends, you as the Forgotten Hero try to stop Mercenar. You either do this by harnessing the power of the heart yourself after the automated system's finished, or by destroying the heart before Mercenar has taken full control. If you decide to destroy the heart, the Clockwork City stops functioning for good, and even the last apostles following Sotha Sil's ways are forced to leave the city in search for a new life, as the city becomes uninhabitable. If, however, you decide to use the power of the heart, you get overwhelmed by the power, and unfortunately then the Forgotten Hero dies themselves, but the sacrifice of the Forgotten Hero, which is you, the player, then allows the population of the Clockwork City to once more power all systems in the city fully, giving them a future and allowing those that were still following Sotha Sil's way to live inside the city for centuries to come, and perhaps even for eternity. And that's what happened to the Clockwork City after the death of Sotha Sil. Definitely an interesting story, and I appreciate it very much that they actually showed us an insight into what happens after Sotha Sil's death. It always really bugged me before playing this questline. That said, that was today's video. If you enjoyed it, consider returning next time for the next Elder Scrolls lore video. And before I end things, allow me to vocally mention my top Patreon supporters: Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Athena Hyotis, Polarized Poutine, Tsar Mikhail, Sword of Bushido, and Mr. Christmas. These amazing people, along with all the others on screen, are my Patreon supporters and they keep this channel alive, and for that I am very grateful. That said, I will see you all next time in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.